In the meantime, we do have a few questions we'd like to start with here. And what we're going to do is we're going to put these questions out to a particular member of the panel who will start first, and then all three members of the panel will get the opportunity to weigh in. So, Kempton, since you spoke first, I'm going to direct this first question first to you, and then we'll go round robin style to James and Brent for this question. So, here it is. What are the top IT questions companies should ask themselves before closing? Kempton, what do you think?
The top IT questions they should ask themselves before closing, I think, goes back to what we did discuss earlier. Do we have an accurate inventory of our entire information technology portfolio? And if we don't, what do we need to do to put one together? And so the first question is, do we have the inventory? And the second question is, if we don't, what do we need to put it together? And then if we have the inventory, can we improve upon it? Meaning, should we renegotiate some of the agreements? Should we, best position ourselves with our information technology portfolio? And what can we do to improve it to make sure it's more attractive to a buyer? Or if we are buying a company, are we able to access and get visibility into the information technology portfolio that we're acquiring?
Thank you very much. We'll move along to James now. Same question. What are the top IT questions companies should ask themselves before closing, James?
I think the biggest thing is, and I'm assuming that this person is asking early on in the process, I think the biggest thing is to understand the technology spend. What are the top 5 or 10 key drivers of technology spend, and how do you get as much information about those as early on in the process as you can, so that you can affect how much money you're going to need to spend after the ink dries when you become one company.
Fair enough. Thank you. And Brent, same question. Top IT questions companies should ask themselves before closing.
Are we aligned? And have we identified the proper dates for the proper diligence? To actually go through the acquisition throughout the actual process of transferring the technology and people.
Fair enough. Thank you for that. We're going to go to a fresh question, and now we're going to start with James. We'll go James, Brent, Kempton on this one. James, which industries have the most complicated IT M&A due diligence challenges?
So I would say I noticed that a lot of the attendees were in the financial services space. I don't know that any are less or more complicated. So I'll give you an example. Some work with Johnson & Johnson in the pharmaceutical space. They have a very complex technology environment because they have to keep 2 versions of lower environments, that one that mirrors production and one that mirrors their UAT. And so that creates complexity in the pharmaceutical industry. In the financial services industry, they have a similar audit requirement for different lower environments from a technology perspective. One area, so we have experience in both of those industries, but a third, a lot of the communications companies, whether it's wireless or cable or telecom, they have agreements with each other that allow them to be dependent upon, sharing of networks, whether they be wireless or wired, a lot of remediation that happens across companies. And so I think that, all industries have their own complexities in different ways.
Thank you. Brent, we're going to ask you the same question. Which industries have the most complicated IT M&A due diligence challenges?
In my experience, the most complicated has been aerospace and defense. And I've gone through the aerospace and defense acquisitions and divestitures and, multiple times. And there's more, the data has many versions of data. So using different applications at different versions that have to be aligned, just so you can, understand how the data looks if you try to consolidate. The vendors are immense in aerospace and defense, and as you're going through acquisitions, there's a lot of data to be consolidated on the vendor side and a lot of vendor spend. I think that's probably one of the bigger areas to identify, because each vendor spend is tied to a different version of an airplane and an application that was used to build that airplane.
Okay, and we're going to round out this question with Kempton. Same thing. Industries with the most complicated IT M&A due diligence challenges, in your opinion, Kempton?
So a couple things that come to mind, just to piggyback on Brent and Jim's comments. One is definitely if you're dealing with classified defense information technology, there's a lot of complexity to that, particularly if the two firms are not at the same level of clearance. So we'll table that one as a kind of a unique situation. And the thing that I would say is the less a company has in assets that it's selling, and the assets are the information technology components of the business, then they're not buying real estate, they're not buying product, they're not buying inventory, they're buying actually the information technology, whether that be software or hardware. Then the actual source code, whether it's patented or not, anywhere that you've got what I would say is non-hard assets being transitioned. So, and specifically what I'm talking about is source code and information technology itself. The less you can touch, feel, and possess it, and the more it's associated with intellectual property, the more complicated the transaction might become.